to order. Is there a motion to approve today's agenda?
So moved.
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Carries. That takes us to the minutes from February 11th. Is there a motion to approve those
So
minutes?
moved.
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. All right. That takes us to our one and only item on our business agenda, which is a big project we've got cooking down at Metro. Come on down. Metropolitan Wastewater Treatment Plant, solids renewal and improvements. We have a proposal.
Yes, sir. Hello, Mr. Chair and members of the Environment Committee. My name is Renee Heflin. I am manager of Plant Engineering Technical Services. I'm here to introduce Stephen Norton, who is the presenter for this business item. Stephen is a principal engineer who has been with Technical Services for a little over 4.5 years. He provides technical support for Metroplant solids processing, and he is also the project manager for Metroplant solids projects.
Welcome.
Stephen.
Thank you, Renee, and thank you, Mr. Chair and committee members, for the opportunity to present business item 2020-81, Metropolitan Wastewater Treatment Plant, solids renewal and improvements. The work of this project includes miscellaneous improvements and renewal of equipment related to processing wastewater solids at the Metro plant in St. Paul. The project has two main objectives. First is to preserve existing wastewater treatment plant infrastructure. Due to the harsh environment inside the incinerators, regular renewals are required every 5 to 7 years. The last renewal was completed in 2014. Second is to optimize and improve performance. This includes reducing operating costs, increasing equipment performance, and increasing reliability. This project is part of a larger Metro Solids program at the Metro plant. This renewal and improvements project will perform work during shorter 8-week incinerator shutdowns to improve system reliability until the 4th incinerator is constructed. The 4th incinerator will be constructed from 2022 to 2024. The added capacity from the 4th incinerator will allow for a more extensive renewal to occur on the existing incinerators from 2025 to 2027. In 2025, the existing incinerators will be 20 years old, and they'll need to be taken out of service for roughly 6 months to 1 year at a time. Mr. Chair and committee members, please refer to the handout attached to the business item. On the back, there is a summary of the project scope. I'm going to touch on 5 of the larger items in the project. New ash and line piping will be installed as depicted in item number 2. New cake pump piping will be installed as depicted in item 3. The fluid bed incinerator air distribution system will be renewed as depicted in item 6. Waste heat boiler tubes will be replaced as depicted in item 7. And a stainless steel liner will be installed in the baghouses as depicted in items 8. With that, I'll move on to the bid summary. This contract was advertised on December 30th, 2019. 2 bids were received on January 30th, 2020. One from Shank Constructors Incorporated for the amount of $19,303,100.00, and one from Pioneer Power Incorporated for $20,679,892.91. The engineer's estimate for the project was $20,015,000.00. The Office of Equal Opportunity and Employment determined that Shank Constructors Incorporated passed the Disadvantaged Business Enterprise Goal evaluation by meeting the DBE goal of 4%. Shank Constructors Incorporated is the lowest responsive and responsible bidder. Therefore, it's staff recommendation that the Metropolitan Council authorize its regional administrator to award and execute contract 19 P187A for construction of the Metropolitan Wastewater Treatment Plant, solids renewals, and improvements. Project numbers 805947 and 808920 with Schenck Constructors Incorporated in the amount of $19,303,100.00. And then with that, would be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions? Please.
You, okay. Oh, hey, thank you, Chair. I just had a couple of questions. If you could kind of talk about like the carbon footprint of the new improvements versus what it currently is, and then some comparisons, some other burners out there, you know, either locally or nationally.
The carbon footprint, I guess, of this particular project won't have any impact on the carbon emissions for the project itself.
Okay, it won't, like with the scrubbers and the air quality and things like that, won't be any improvements that we're currently doing and that, or?
Mr. Chair and committee members, the improvements to the scrubber that we're doing will increase the performance of the scrubber, and it's expected that we would be able to improve the particulate removal through the scrubber through the changes we're making.
Okay.
So the carbon reduction might not be impacted, but the air quality, it would certainly help us maintain our permits that we have through EPA or MPCA or whatever permits we may have around air quality, I would suspect.
Yeah, correct. Mr. Chair and committee members, the improvements that we're making right now will improve the particulate removal for the scrubbers, and it's also important that it'll also demonstrate performance that we'll use for the fourth incinerator to meet the lower standards that the fourth incinerator will have to meet.
Is it EPA permits that we have through that for air quality, an EPA only, or is it also MPCA?
Mr. Chair and committee members, currently we comply with the MACT requirements through EPA, and then we also have a Title V permit through the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency.
Both of them. Okay, thank you. Committee member Sterner.
Well, thank you, Chair. I just was wondering, will this help maximize the calories of burning up the cake in that then? Like, will we get more efficiency by the combustion of the cake?
Mr. Chair and committee members, yes, I do believe some of these project components will increase the efficiency of the incineration process. One particularly, we're going to be putting in the liner in the baghouse, which currently has some holes, and so when we patch those holes, that'll increase efficiency through that process.
All right, thank you.
And that bag house is all about dust collection, right? Am I recalling that correctly from the tours?
Yes,
Okay,
Mr.
good.
Chair, Mr. Chair and committee members, there's over 800 cloth filter bags in the baghouse.
Great. Other questions? Do we have any experience with this particular company? We feel like they're going to do a good job?
Yes, Mr. Chair and committee members, we do have experience with Schenck Constructors, and I mean, we're confident that they're the lowest responsible bidder for this project.
And are they local to the Twin Cities or Minnesota, or I imagine they have to be.
Yes, Mr. Chair and committee members, they are local.
Very good. Other questions, or I'd be open to a motion, please.
I'll move approval as recommended by the staff.
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Carries. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
That takes us to our information item this afternoon on rural center policy and implementation. Welcome back to the committee, both of you.
Mr. Chair and council members, my name is Jeannie Clancy. I'm the Assistant General Manager for Technical Services, and Kyle Colvin is with me this evening. He's the Manager of Engineering Programs, and we're presenting this policy to you. It was requested by Councilmember Zarin, who expressed it as an item of interest, and we'll also be meeting with Councilmember Zarin later this week to talk about how this policy and our implementation of this policy specifically affects some of the areas that is within his district that includes the East Bethel area. So our presentation objective this evening is to explain the council's policy on rural centers and its implementation through the regional wastewater system. Some of the topics that we'll include this evening is the rural center policy history, our policy implementation, the impact of the Great Recession on our policy, some of the actions that the council took in response to the Great Recession and how our communities were being impacted, and then some next steps for the council to consider as we develop our 2050 Water Resources Policy Plan. So as you know, in the backdrop, the council's mission is to foster the efficient and economic growth for a prosperous region. And we do that through a variety of services that we offer, but specific to us and to the Environment Committee is the wastewater treatment and collection and treatment system, which has a very significant impact on the orderly growth of the region. So our policy planning framework is that the council is directed to prepare the Water Resources Policy Plan through Minnesota Statutes 473.145. This statute directs the development of a plan for the regional wastewater collection and treatment system, along with supporting policies and goals and standards. And there's a picture of the policy plan that is adopted there. And if you look at that, it has all of that information in there. The plan is also developed in response to Minnesota Statutes 473.157, which requires the council to adopt a water resources plan and the federal requirements for regional management to address pollution from point sources, and point sources would be our wastewater treatment plants, as well as non-point sources such as stormwater runoff. So taking just a kind of a look back through history, in 1969, the legislature created the Metropolitan Sewer Board to develop a modern regional wastewater collection and treatment system. And as many of you know, in the late 60s, early 70s, the region was really suffering from poor water quality because we had 35 wastewater treatment plants that were marginally treating wastewater and oftentimes discharging the effluent to very sensitive water bodies, lakes, and streams that oftentimes really were struggling with the effluent discharge. In response to concerns about water quality, the Metropolitan Sewer Board was formed to improve wastewater treatment, thereby protecting public health, the environment, and fostering the economic growth of the region. When the sewer board was created, 35 wastewater treatment plants were acquired, and then there were 16 additional plants that were located throughout the Metropolitan throughout the metropolitan area, the 7-county metropolitan area, that were not acquired. So if we look at this slide right here, within those 35 plants that were acquired, there were 15 that were freestanding communities, and those are located there. All of these communities operated their own treatment plants. The other 20 that were within the 35 were a partnership of some sort. So for example, Minneapolis and St. Paul isn't listed because that was a partnership, and there were a number of partnerships that were brought in to the Metropolitan Service District area. So if we take a look at this time frame and we begin at the 1970s, which shows the acquisition of the plant, then we move to the 1980s, we really didn't have a freestanding, we didn't have a policy plan for freestanding growth centers. And so the acquisition of wastewater treatment plants was not recommended by the council and approved by the cities. Then in the 1990s, we didn't have the policy in place, and so the city of Mare requested that their wastewater treatment plant be acquired, and we declined to acquire that plant at that time. In 2003, in response to the request by the cities of Elko and Newmarket and the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency, we started to develop a policy plan. The Elko Newmarket wastewater treatment plant discharged to the Vermilion River. Kyle will cover this in a little bit more detail, but because of the impact of the plant's effluent on the Vermilion River, the cities of Elko, Newmarket, and the PCA asked that the council consider acquisition. And so in 2003 and 2004, there was an amendment to our existing water resources policy plan. And then in 2005, that amendment became part of our policy plan, and it became known as the Rural Growth Center Policy. And then again in 2015, that policy was modified in some way and became the Rural Center Policy. If we look at the 2040 Water Resources Policy Plan today, it includes the current long-term service plan, which was adopted for the 2040 Water Resources Policy Plan was adopted in 2015. The slide before you shows the existing wastewater treatment plant and the service area for each plant, along with future plant sites. And those future plant sites show one along the Crow River, one in Scott County, and we've identified two pink spots along South Scott County because we haven't determined the plant location, and then one in Hastings, which will replace the existing Hastings facility. The dark shaded areas of each wastewater treatment plant service area is a composite of each community's 2030 plan and then what each anticipated as being served with the regional wastewater services. In addition, the lighter shaded areas reflect the council's long-term service areas. This reflects a post-2040 view of the areas that could be served given the ultimate capacity of each wastewater treatment plant. So if we look at Empire, at the lower part of the screen, you see the darker pink area, or the darker salmon area, which is the existing service area. And then the lighter pink shows the area that could be served ultimately by the plant. This generally represents a 50 to 60-year vision, and many of you have heard us talk about that we plan for our facilities long-term in advance because we need that amount of time in order to appropriately guide growth. So when you look at this plan, when we were formed, we served about 1.8 million people. Today we serve about 3 million people, and this ultimate plan shows about 6 million people. So now I'll transition to Kyle.
Thank you, Janine. What I'll be doing is covering some of the considerations that went into the policy development for the rural centers that really started actually before 2005, but that became part of the policy with the adoption of the Water Resources Management Policy Plan. During the early 2000s, areas outside of the long-term wastewater service area was seeing increased pressure for development. Those would have been those white areas that you saw on that map that Janine showed, kind of the areas between the long-term regional wastewater service and those yellow areas, which were the communities that had their own wastewater treatment services. So those areas were seeing increased development pressure. In response to that, the council developed policies related to focusing growth in the rural centers and preserving areas outside of the rural centers for future urban development. These areas were reaffirmed by the council and through its assigned community planning designations, held these areas in a diversified rural. So the 4 per 40, or you commonly hear the 1 per 10. So it preserved those so that they couldn't be developed at a rural residential development or 2.5 acre lots. It also, in other areas, especially in Carver County, where we had an agreement, those areas were maintained as agricultural, so residential densities or development couldn't occur at anything greater than 1 per 40. So it was preserving those areas for future development, sewered urban development. The rationale for the policy was to protect those existing residents and businesses in the rural centers from the increased costs associated with the development outside of the rural centers. And it also addressed some of the concerns that those urban communities were expressing regarding subsidizing growth outside of the urban area, or to address what was commonly defined as sprawl, or described as sprawl. The Rural Growth Center policy included policies related to rural centers' request for regional wastewater services. The council would determine if the service request was in the best interest of the region, and it would do so by looking through the lens of whether or not there was sufficient short and long-term growth to justify a return on that regional investment. Basically, the request for regionalization or regional service would come in through two types. The first would be a request for the local wastewater treatment plant to be acquired by the council, and this would occur through a formal request through the comprehensive planning process. So in their plan, either through an amendment or in the update, it would require that the request be expressed in their plan, and likewise, that's what Roger did when they came in last year, requesting acquisition of their treatment facility. The council would consider the request, and if there was unavailable or insufficient interceptor capacity for a local wastewater phase out, then it would consider acquiring the wastewater treatment plant. That's typically not the first option that we like to pursue, but in certain circumstances when there isn't any other option for providing that regional service, then we will entertain acquiring the local wastewater treatment plant. In these cases where it appears that acquiring the treatment plant is the best option, the council would acquire it and operate the rural center treatment plant only if there is enough developable land to accommodate the growth. There's sufficient room to accommodate a future plant expansion, and there are no regulatory issues related to a continuance of operating a treatment plant. The other request for regional service, as I described, would be phasing out the local plant and extending regional interceptor services to the community. The council would determine if there's adequate, the agreement to extend these services would be predicated on the council determining that there is adequate regional capacity in the interceptor and treatment systems, and if not, the cost to provide the added capacity would be required to be economically feasible. It would also require that there is sufficient land areas to accommodate future growth and justify the regional investment. And then the council, if so, then the council would extend that interceptor service to a local centralized point of service. Commonly, this would be the wastewater treatment facility in the community. If there is little land for future development and the forecasts reflect little growth opportunity, the community would be required to build a local trunk sewer to get to that portion of the regional system in which there is capacity. So again, looking at it from, there would be a requirement from the council standpoint that there has to be that growth to collect on the debt service that would be incurred when we make those regional investments. In cases where a regional investment is made to serve a rural center, a community SAC rate would include costs, the added cost associated with the debt service related to the improvements necessary to provide the service. The cost of treatment services would be the same for that community as those paid by the rest of the current users of the system. I'll now go over four instances where rural center policies were implemented in response to wastewater service requests. And those four instances has to do with a request for the city of Carver, Elko Newmarket, East Bethel, and New Germany. In the case of Carver, in 2005, the council issued a systems statement for the city of Carver, which identified it as a rural growth center. The city owned and operated their own wastewater treatment plant. As a result of growth pressure associated with the widening of Highway 212 and the fact that the growth in Carver would be contiguous with development in Chaska, the city requested a designation change to a developing community through an amendment to the comprehensive plan and requested that regional service be provided to the city. There was adequate capacity in the regional system to accommodate the phase out of the city's existing wastewater treatment plant. So in 2010, the council completed construction of an interceptor from Chaska to the city's wastewater treatment plant. The city decommissioned the wastewater treatment plant at their expense and directed flow to the lift station that was also included as part of the council's interceptor project. Ownership of the lift station and that portion of the interceptor located within the city of Carver was then transferred over to the city. In the example of Elko New Market, the city was facing growth pressures for development around I-35 and challenges with the city's wastewater treatment plant discharge, as Janine had alluded to earlier, to the Vermilion River caused concerns from the PCA and associated water quality concerns to the Vermilion River. The council extended service in 2010 from the existing regional interceptor located in Lakeville. Long-term plans for this interceptor, which is also known as the Elko Market Interceptor, is to extend it all the way in the future to the Empire Wastewater Treatment Plant when capacity is needed to accommodate future growth in Eureka and Castle Rock townships. The city decommissioned their treatment plant at their expense after directing flow to the council's interceptor. The city currently pays a rural center incremental SAC charge of $2,200 in addition to the regional SAC of $2,485 per unit. They have a reserve capacity loan cap of $1.2 million, and this will be reached, it has been reached or will be reached this year. For East Bethel, to support sewer development along Highway 65, the city had been considering sewer development and their own wastewater treatment plant with surface water discharge when discussions between the council and the city began in 2005. The city concluded that a new surface water discharge to Cedar Creek, which is a designated high outstanding resource water body, was very unlikely. Therefore, the city requested Rural Growth Center designation in 2006, and the council began planning for a new wastewater treatment facility based on groundwater recharge. This also represented an opportunity for the urbanization on regional wastewater systems in northern Anoka County. Construction of the new wastewater reclamation facility was completed in 2014 with a current capacity of a little over 400,000 gallons per day, and the facility can be increased to accommodate 1.2 million gallons per day in the future when needed. An interceptor was also built along Highway 65 and Viking Drive, anticipating future service to Oak Grove. The interceptor was upsized for East Bethel use, and the city has paid for the cost associated with that local capacity benefit. The city currently pays a rural center incremental SAC of $700, again, in addition to the $2,485 regional SAC charge. They have a reserve capacity loan cap of $2 million. And the last example is regarding New Germany, and the city has currently provided wastewater services through a locally owned treatment plant, citing development pressure and growth and limited capacity in the wastewater stabilization pond. The city, as part of their 2030 comprehensive plan update, requested regional service in 2008. Because there were no regional interceptors in the vicinity of Germany, the council considered acquiring the city's treatment plant, and an acquisition agreement was executed between the council and the city in 2010. Between the elimination of growth pressure due to the economic downturn around 2010 and local I&I mitigation efforts by the city that recaptured capacity in their treatment facility, the need for acquiring the treatment plant was deferred until 2015, when an amendment to the agreement was between the council and the city further deferred acquisition until the city formally requests it. This amended agreement expires in 2030. The city's 2040 plan is currently being reviewed by the council, and acquisition of the wastewater treatment plant is not one of the three options seriously being considered by the city. The city is currently considering upgrading their existing wastewater treatment plant to accommodate the needed capacity for growth, considering connecting with the City of Mayor system with limited service and continuing to rely on some level of service to their existing plant. And the third option would be a total connection to the Mayor system for full service and decommissioning of their existing plant.
So now I'd like to talk a little bit about the 2008 Great Recession and how the council responded to that. So in 2008, because of the recession, exurban growth stopped for several years. And so we have wastewater service agreements, as Kyle just described, with East Bethel and Elko Newmarket that were based on SAC, on pre-recession growth forecasts from comprehensive plans. The agreements included automatic loan when growth is less than the forecasted, and the loans were increasing rapidly with a potential adverse impact on the community's financial health, which would further hinder growth. So in response, the council convened a task force, and I believe that one of the council members here was on that, one of those task forces, maybe, was a, that's all. Chair and the council then, as a result, capped the SAC loan. And this slide is incorrect. The SAC loan in the wastewater service agreement for East Bethel was capped at $2 million, but at Elko Newmarket it was capped at $1.2 million. And that's really reflective of the debt that we were carrying. And this was to avoid adverse impact on the community's financial health. In addition, a portion of the East Bethel wastewater reclamation facilities cost became a regional cost, and we identified a demonstration project to look at groundwater recharge in the area, as well as our ability to treat our wastewater to a higher use in the anticipation of doing wastewater reuse at one point in our history. And then finally, we expanded in 2015 as part of the 2040 Water Resources Policy Plan. We expanded the criteria to ensure regional benefits and enhance decision-making processes through consultation with our urban customers. So the policy plan does require now specific customer engagement when we're making decisions on rural centers. So going forward, it appears to staff that, and through the comprehensive planning process, that the rural centers typically like to retain local control, so additional service requests are unlikely for many years. Our rural centers are oftentimes influenced by a number of issues. One is the surrounding land use, the amount of available land that's available for development. Transportation systems, as Kyle mentioned, Carver was significantly impacted by the extension of Highway 212, which really changed the scenario for them in terms of development. Their ability to be served by other council facilities, the Elko Newmarket was an example where we could extend an interceptor and serve 2 additional communities. And then the presence and condition of local wastewater treatment facilities. So oftentimes people ask me about, for example, St. Francis, which recently built and actually commissioned their wastewater treatment facility about the same time frame that we commissioned the East Bethel plant. So again, we don't anticipate that St. Francis would be requesting that we acquire their facility at any point in the near future. And as we look to our future considerations and as we start developing our policy plan for 2050, we're working on the comprehensive plans that were required under the 2040 plan. The staff is already working on development of the 2050 plan and some of the planning processes that need to go into those considerations. So as we look at the 2050 plan, we would anticipate recommending that we retain the 2015 policy on serving rural centers, that the policy plan consider a financial policy to be flexible to address specific rural center circumstances and to support our regional cost of services and charges. And then finally, that we evaluate the need for changes to status and our financial assistance rules to address rural center challenges, because when we look at our rural centers and how they might be able to be competitive with state grants that for greater Minnesota, we want to make sure that the communities that are not served by the Metropolitan disposal system, but that are within the 7-county metropolitan area, are not at a disadvantage. So we'll want to just consider that as well. And with that, we will respond to any questions that you may have.
Excellent report. Thank you.
Mm.
How many total wastewater treatment plants are within our region? I know we have 9. You mentioned Meyer and
And 9,
New Germany, St. Francis,
24 total.
We believe.
24 wastewater treatment plants in the 7-county metropolitan area. Interesting. Okay.
Mr. Chair and members of the council, that's just quick math. We own 9, and then we believe that we have 15 remaining. Loretto will decommission their plant by the end of 2020 or early 2021.
Right.
So,
Mr. Chair, committee members, the map here, those communities that have their own wastewater treatment plant are those areas that are highlighted in kind of the yellow-orange color. So you can see that the western part of the metropolitan area, Carver and Scott County, has the majority of those facilities. There are some in Dakota County as well, but
Please.
Thank you, Chair. Just looking for a history lesson here. So this the sewer development slide number 8 talks about in the 1980s the growth centers, and so the council reached a decision that they wanted to acquire the treatment plants, and the city's pushed back. And was that primarily on a local control kind of argument, or I'm wondering what the rationale was?
Mr. Chair and council members, that is absolutely correct. So we acquired the original 35 that were part of the, that were identified, and then we had the additional 16, and there was discussion, and there was a real interest in maintaining local control. So the council, our predecessor agency, the Metropolitan Waste Control District, did not pursue the acquisition at that time.
Right.
And then some of those plants have now, in fact, become part of our system.
and Mr. Chair, Councilmember Fredson, and many of those are still existing today, and those again are those yellow areas.
Commissioner Snerner.
Oh, thank you, Chair. I just had a few questions. So, like, one of it is like the difference between having a big system. Seems like we gain efficiencies and economies of scale, but then if they don't need as much, they can have a smaller system. Maybe it's lower cost as well. So I don't know if you could just talk about the economic part between being on their own system. Like, where does it they pull the point where it's better to join us versus have their own system, and then is there sometimes there's also kind of collective, like, you know, in transportation we have like opt-out carriers that communities that go together, and I see like you have like Mayor and New Germany and Watertown, and that are pretty close together. So do they kind of talk to each other, or they consider doing their own system if it doesn't qualify for our big system, that kind of thing?
Sure. Mr. Chair and Councilmember Sterner, there's a lot of questions in that, but for the most part, most of the local communities will try and work together collectively. For instance, we cited New Germany and Mayor. Now we're trying to work out a cooperative solution to Germany's issue. I know that Hamburg, the very southwestern part of Carver County, was also challenged with wastewater treatment issues, and they have worked out an agreement with Norwood Young America, whereby they would phase out their treatment plant and Hamburg would pump the flow to the north. So there are a lot of times there are that cooperative discussions between the communities. Now, in terms of the community's autonomy, if you will, with operating their own treatment facility, many times cost really isn't a deciding factor. I think in many cases, because of the economy of scale that you referenced, treatment costs many times can be a little bit higher out in the rural growth center areas, and primarily because of solids. The disposal and treatment handling of solids usually kind of dries up a lot of those costs. But also some of the other deciding factors is that some of these communities just don't want to become part of the Metropolitan Council system. And I had an opportunity to actually talk to Germany the other day, and that was one of the concerns that was expressed by the city clerk out there, was the fact that with regional wastewater service comes other council expectations in terms of residential sewer development, densities and things like that. So there's a lot of things that kind of come into play at the local level when decisions are being made in terms of, keeping their own treatment system or coming in with a request for regional service.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
And then, Mr. Chair, if I could add, Kyle described one situation. On the other hand, we just acquired a plant for the city of Rogers that for 20 years has been planning their city in a way that would be consistent with the council's development expectations, knowing full well that ultimately they would be asking for the council to acquire their facility and expand service to Dayton and Corcoran. So Kyle mentioned local preferences. It really comes into play here.
Okay, thank you.
So one thing I wasn't aware of with the SAC fees, that there was like an additional surcharge in these rural areas. And the rationale for that is when there's a new connection or expanded business, that we've had to build out the interceptor in these cases. Is that why there's a surcharge? They pay the base rate and they pay another $800 or a couple $1,000 in one case.
So, Mr. Chair and council members and Kyle can add that those additional charges are because we have been asked to advance our infrastructure prior to when we had planned to do so. So it was outside of what our planning window was. So, for example, in Rogers, again, not a rural center, but there is no additional SAC, and so that doesn't apply in that particular case. But when we've been asked to advance our work ahead of what our schedule might be, that's when there's an additional SAC charge.
We say, yeah, we can do it, but it's going to come with a little bit of a extra price tag.
That is correct.
Please.
Mr. Chair, Ms. Clancy, typically how long does that extra surcharge then last?
20 years on those? It's 20 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
It goes along with retiring our debt for the improvements that were made, and that's typically 20 years. Although I'm assuming that could have been negotiated to be something different, but 20 years.
Okay.
Has that been a controversial thing, or people understand that?
Mr. Chair and council members, I think that when we had the recession, that was very stressful to the communities that were being impacted. The Elko New Market in East Bethel, it was, of course, a great disappointment that they were not growing to the extent that they thought they were. And, of course, there was also concern about the remaining parts of the metropolitan area and how much they would be helping out these areas. And so I think that the council, and I was a member of a customer community at the time, I think the council exercised a very fair approach of asking them to pay, but not getting to a point where it was causing such financial stress that there would be no growth in the area.
Thank you. Please.
Okay, this was kind of look at the map again, but is it true like Campton and Vermilion have their own plants right now? But they could be, obviously they're close enough to be part of the system at some point.
Mr. Chair and Councilmember Sterner, that is correct. The council actually, probably 10 years or so ago, did a study in response to an inquiry from the city of Hampton. And so they haven't come in formally with a request to take over the plant, but the study did evaluate what the cost would be to basically phase out the treatment plant and pump the flow to the Empire treatment plant. But we're not envisioning that request to actually come in officially anytime soon.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? Hopefully Ray will tune this in sometime. He missed a good presentation for him.
Very good.
Thanks again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And that takes us to the general manager's report, which I think is going to be pretty quiet tonight.
It's quiet tonight. I know you guys are probably all got other places to get, and this might allow you some time to grab something to eat before you get to your caucus if you're heading that direction. So your day's not over.
Very good. We are adjourned. Thank you very much.